Welcome back to Perhaps Today podcast, where we bring you, the viewer, the listener, conversations that challenge, inspire, and move us closer to truth, justice, and purpose. Obviously, I am your host, Karl, and today we're diving into a powerful story of personal growth and racial awakening. Our esteemed guest is Dr. David Markward, a longtime educator and the author of the book that we're going to discuss, From Dubuque to Selma and Beyond, My Journey to Understand Racism in America. In his work, Dr. Markward takes us through his transformation from growing up in a predominantly white Midwest community of Dubuque to walking the road of self-reflection, history, and empathy that continues to shape his life today. This conversation is about more than one man's journey. It's about what it means for all of us to face uncomfortable truths, ask better questions, and grow into a deeper understanding of one another. Whether you're an educator, a community leader, or simply someone who wants to listen and learn, this episode will speak directly to you. Now, Dr. Markward and I, when I was still living in Iowa, had a chance to take this show on the road and sit next to each other and engage an audience. But as I said to people in the audience personally, I think this is a book that is a must read for anyone who, especially in today's political and social climate, who is hearing the word racism and seeing the things that are being perpetuated on citizens of this country, to open yourself up to learning and, as I said earlier, self-reflection. So this will be Dr. Markward and I's first time doing this as a podcast, but I am always just honored that he takes the time to allow me to ask him questions, but definitely excited about the work that he has penned, and would recommend that each of you, if you would and could, buy this book, read it, and share it with others. And so with that, welcome, Dr. Markward, and yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the question and answer portion.
Thank you, Karl, for such a kind introduction. And I take the term Dubuque, the place, for granted because that's where I was born and raised and spent the first 17 years of my life. So just for a little bit for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with Dubuque, Dubuque is a city in Iowa, about 55,000 people. It's been that way for the population, pretty constant over the years. It sits on the Mississippi River, directly across the border from Illinois and Wisconsin. So if you kind of think of a map of where Dubuque is located, it's in the heartland on the banks of the greatest river in the world. At least that's the way I feel about it. And it has been a journey. I'll quickly describe Dubuque growing up. You could go days, perhaps weeks, and one of the mayors at the time said you could go weeks without seeing a person of color in the city of Dubuque. There were a few folks of color that were there, but in my world, for instance, my elementary school, 0 kids of color. Junior high school, 0. Went to Dubuque Senior High, a proud Ram, and at the time it was a school comprised of 3 grades and nearly 2,000 students. There were 5 students of color at that time. 3 were kids from Dubuque. 1 was a foreign exchange student from Ethiopia, and 1 was a foreign exchange student from India. So my opportunities to interact with people who did not look like me were very, very few and far between. I'd just like to almost footnote here that Dubuque today is a very different city. If you walk through the neighborhoods where I grew up, you will see folks of color. School district has about 11,000 students at this time. I think right around 1,000 of those students are students of color and interspersed throughout the schools in the city. So it is a different place. The city has been on a journey similar to the one I'm taking. And I hasten to add that that journey continues. I've had many aha moments that maybe indicate I've made some progress, but I still have a ways to go. And with people like you, Karl, helping me along the way, that journey has been a very just journey and filled with joy and learning along the way as well.
Wonderful. Want to just give you an applause. You certainly deserve it. For the journey you've taken, and again, as I said, this work that you penned. And so let's just kind of start with a question that I think most people would ask. What inspired you to write this book, and why now?
That's a good question, and I will kind of reframe it in the way that I hear it when I'm giving talks at book events and so on. A lot of people say, "Did you intend to write a book about racism?" And the very quick answer to that is no, wasn't on my mind. As things happen in our life through serendipity, divine intervention, dumb luck, I'm not sure, but one evening in February of 2018, I was at home the evening scanning the channels, maybe like many of you do, looking for something to watch, and I came across a rebroadcast of the very first show that David Letterman did after he left the late night circuit. The name of that show was My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. His very first guest was former President Barack Obama, and I tuned in. I had followed the former president when he was a senator in Illinois. I heard his spellbinding speech in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention. At that time, I thought to myself and shared with others, we better keep an eye on this guy. I think he's special. And of course, 4 years later, he was elected our president. 4 years after that, reelected. So I was very interested in what he had to say and what he'd been doing since he left the White House. And as you might imagine, Letterman and Barack Obama, two very, very bright guys, senses of humor, some very interesting exchanges, some laughter. In one of the segments, former President Obama was talking about his trip to Selma in 2015 to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. And he related how he felt, and there were clips, and there was one takeaway or one cutaway, I guess you could say, where just Letterman and the late Congressman John Lewis walked individually, just the two of them, across the Selma Bridge and recalled the events from 1965, the very first crossing where John Lewis nearly lost his life, was beaten, suffered a skull fracture. And when something hit me there, Karl, that I said, I'm going to Selma. And I then a few days later talked to my partner, Sheila Lehman. I said, I'm going to Selma in a couple of weeks. Do you want to go with me? And she said, yes. I had no idea what I was going to see. We go to Montgomery a couple of days early because we wanted to go to some of the museums and kind of educate ourselves about the events around Selma. I would encourage everyone to go to Selma for one of the reenactments, but if you do, also go to Montgomery, a very interesting city, the birthplace of civil rights, the cradle of the Confederacy in the same place, and they've not covered up their history. The museums are magnificent. You can learn a lot by going to the museums. There are placards and signs that indicate, for instance, where the slave markets were, where certain events took place. Again, a very open and informative history. So we found ourselves in March of 2018 outside Brown Chapel, where the original march originated and all the reenactments. We listened to the speakers, and then we started our march about a mile from the church down to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The name of that bridge, at that time, I had no idea who Edmund Pettus was. Well, he was a Confederate general in the Confederate Army. He later became a senator, United States senator, and a Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. So I'm thinking that's interesting to have a bridge named after that particular individual. Um, we were accompanied by about 20,000 other people. And other than the birth of each of my four children, it was one of the most uplifting experiences I've ever had, emotionally uplifting, a high, if you will. You could look to the left and have a conversation, to the right, forward, back. People there for a purpose, to recognize the need, the ongoing need, to bring about fair voting rights. So here we were, 60 some years later, still talking about the same kinds of things. When I came home, I recalled that one of the speakers said, when you go home, do something.
Mm.
Certainly talk to your friends about it, but do something perhaps more lasting. One of my older brothers said, Dave, why don't you write something? So I wrote a little essay, put it on Facebook to share with others, got some positive feedback about the writing itself, about the experience. Um, and yet that whole uplifting experience, I ended the little essay with, and I'm paraphrasing here, but why do we have to do this every year? I was thinking we've really turned the corner on civil rights and racism. And of course, the events from then and the intervening years have shown we still have a long way to go. That
We
was
do.
the beginning. And then shortly thereafter, Sheila Lehman gave me Ibram Kendi's book. I'm looking right at it. It's never far from me. Stamped from the beginning. And
Yeah.
on page 3, it becomes very clear on the Senate floor in 1860, April 12th, 1860, Jefferson Davis, then a senator, is talking about the superiority, frankly, of the white race, and it's been stamped from the beginning.
Mm.
Well, by then I've have lived enough of my life and interacted with individuals, including you, Karl, that I knew that was patently false, that no race has the corner of the market on intelligence or anything else. It has a lot to do, or it has all to do with opportunity and that kind of thing. And so then I began researching in earnest, writing in earnest, and I was on my way. I didn't know it would take almost 6 years, but it has been well worth it, at least personally to me,
And
and
personally,
and for those I've touched, I believe.
yeah, absolutely, definitely. So you talked at the beginning a little bit about Dubuque, but talk about the pivotal moments that maybe made you aware of racism outside of um, not having, people of color that lived in Dubuque, but what were some of the touch points? And I know you talk about it a little bit in your book, just scenarios during your life in Dubuque that you reflect on and was like, whoa, I didn't quite get it then, and I get it now. But talk a little bit about some of that and what people can expect if they do open up this book.
The very first day, I like to tell people I went to college on a full ride. My dad took me from the front door of our house all the way right up to the door of the dormitory. So that was a full ride. And I unpacked my meager belongings, and the next day football practice started. I'm walking out to practice, and uh, on the edge of the practice field, sitting on a bench, is a handsome young black man. And I recognized him because we had played. I was from Dubuque. He was from Davenport. He played for Davenport Central, a really, really good football team. We played there when I was a junior. And I remember, there was a tradition. They played the fight song after a team would score a touchdown. I knew their fight song by halftime. That they
How
had
much
a very, very
fun.
good football team. And I had seen this young man wrestle. His name's Tony Clay, to this day, one of my dear friends. And I walked up to him and I asked him, "Are you Tony Clay?" And he said, "Yes." And we exchanged some pleasantries. And for the first time in my life, for an extended period of time, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with, become friends with, and teammates and fraternity brothers with a young black man. And that started to open the door because what had filled my life mostly were the misrepresentations, the things that I had seen in cartoons, in movies, and the way black folks were portrayed, the way white people wanted them to be portrayed. And as I say, that very first day at Augustana College, um, things started to change. And this journey has had, fortunately for me, a number of people that have come into my life um, and helped me see the injustices. And by the way, I interviewed 35 people for the book, 30 of them men and women of color. None of them had ever come to me, I'll use the word whining about what was going on. And I'd worked professionally with some of them very closely for years. Never talked about those things. The key, I asked one question: have you ever been profiled? And by that, I mean racially profiled. And that opened a door to terrific understanding on my part that the world of people of color, everyday people who walk the same streets and go into the same stores, drive the same highways, is a very different world. I don't get up each day and say, what's going to happen to me because I'm white? And my friends don't tell me that, but they have in the stories they've shared with me that going into a store, driving down the street, there's that awareness that something could happen. And that was a very key question that really led the way to deeper understanding.
So you open up each chapter with questions for readers. Why was it important to make the book interactive or more so reflective? Um, and do you see it more as a conversation than a memoir? And should this conversation be had more than it currently is outside of our kind of back and forth, you bad, me good sort of dialogue that we're having now?
Yeah, my experience has been if you walk into a room and say, "Hey, let's talk about racism," oh my, you've got people looking at their shoes, and it is a very uncomfortable thing to talk about for a lot of folks. And part of that is a lack of understanding, a lack of opportunity to have some of the interactions that I have had. I'm a teacher. I believe we learn through answering questions. And so that was my choice that each chapter title would start with a question. For example, have you been profiled? And by that, I mean racially profiled. I've been profiled before. If I can share a real quick story, in the 1970s, I was in the National Guard. And I was also taking a graduate class in nonverbal communication. And we had to come up with a project. My project, I put on my National Guard greens, the dress suit of a guardsman. I went out on a very busy street in Rock Island, Illinois, and I hitchhiked. And I had a friend back in a distance taking photographs so I could share that as part of my presentation in the nonverbal communication class. Almost every car that passed when I had my thumb out stopped. Then I changed my outfit. I took off my shirt, I put on a vest, I put beads around my neck, I got a long dark wig, I put on bell-bottom pants and sandals and stood in the same spot. And hardly anyone stopped. All based on it was the same guy in both cases, but
Right.
all in appearances. And I can do this too. I may make snap judgments based on preconceived notions that are in my mind, and I think part of the racial divide is because of that. Lack of experience leads to predisposed ideas about individuals, and it prevents that interaction. Um, so the first chapter, have you ever been profiled? Then and I'm not going to go through all 9 chapters with you, Karl, but just an example of how things can become turned around. As you know, second chapter of the book is, have you read Uncle Tom's Cabin? And if you had asked me that a few years ago, I would have said, of course I have. I knew a lot about Uncle Tom. Well, then I read the book by Harriet Beecher Stowe, written or published in 1852, and I knew I had not. And as you know, there's not if you call particularly a black male Uncle Tom, that is at near the top, if not the top of the insult list. It's a very disparaging term. And I would invite people before they weigh in on whether that term's good or bad to read the book and find out, first of all, about Uncle Tom, and
Right.
then read about the book's publication, um, the things that happened after, how it was portrayed, and you will see that white people changed the character of Uncle Tom from something that he was, and I don't want to, I want you to read the book, so I'm not going to give it away, but to
Please.
something that some white people, for their benefit, wanted Uncle Tom to be.
Right. Absolutely. So we know when people write about race, and justice, it can become deeply personal. What was the hardest part to you about writing this book, and did you ever second guess whether to include certain stories?
Yeah, the very first thing I wrestled with was the N word.
Mhm.
Um, and as you know, I have used that word, and I used it growing up. Never directed. I call myself an ignorant racist.
Mhm.
I didn't know what I didn't know, and I would tell stories and use words that I shouldn't, not directed at anyone, and not in the presence certainly of people of color. I was ignorant about those kinds of things. I think there is intentional racism that will keep people in a perceived place for personal gain. So I kind of separate um, those kinds of things. So very early on, I had to decide. First of all, I had to decide, as a white guy, should I be even writing the book?
Mhm.
And I got feedback from um, the people that I were interviewing. I'd asked them that early on, and they said, gave me the confidence that said, yes, we trust you. We want you to write it. I read a book by John Feinstein, and the foreword was written by Doug Williams.
Mhm.
And Feinstein had asked Doug Williams the same thing, and Doug Williams, the first black quarterback to play in the Super Bowl, said, if you don't write this book, it may sound like a black man whining. And so
Mhm.
that kind of put some wind in my sails that it would be okay to put it out there. And predominantly for white audiences to hear what I had to say and had experienced in what I think is a very positive way. The other thing was the use of the N word, and I did include it in its full form in some quotes. And again, I consulted some of the people that I was interviewing. They said, "Do it." To in all its ugliness, to get the full impact, you have to use that word.
Mhm.
And I do not say that word. It won't come, but I've written it in context. Um, and I believe it does add to the impact of the writing. But that was a tough decision. Um,
Mhm.
but but that's the way I went.
Okay. What are some of the biggest misconceptions Americans have about racism? Um, and do you think some of these misconceptions are changing throughout different generations?
Ooh, I'll answer the second part first, if
Okay.
I may.
Mhm.
As I said, when I came away from Selma the first time, and I've been there 3 times now for the reenactment, and each time has been a little bit different, and I've learned a great deal each time. Um, but that, so I came away saying, yes, we have turned the corner. And in a very short time, there were some incidents that happened, among them George Floyd's death. And then I started looking into other um, lynchings. I would consider George Floyd's death without due process a lynching, and started reading some history and then recent history. So I think in one of our previous conversations, Karl, you pointed out that most of what's in my book came after slavery, after the Civil War. So some people say, oh, slavery, that's over. We've had a black president. You don't have to look too far. And I think today, it appears that we are backsliding in terms of equality and equity and just plain decency um, to people, not just people of color, but people who are perceived somehow different.
Right.
And, that's disheartening. But that's one of the reasons I write to get a message out, to have audiences that will listen. And I have no way of knowing in any detail what happens after a book talk or after someone reads the book, but I have gotten some pretty good feedback um, that it has opened their eyes and that they were in a place where I once was. They are on their journeys now, but we have a long, long way to go. And I have looked at the golden rule. It's kind of just such a simple thing, and it is it almost verbatim in every major religion of the world. And wow, at least from my perspective, it seems that some folks really have a hard time trying to live up to that. And none of us are perfect, and I still make mistakes, but I'm trying, and I think that's a good thing to kind of grasp and aspire to.
Well, you're right. Eh, when you say some people have a hard time, but I think it's intentional. They're not even trying to live up to the standard of the golden rule, which is unfortunate. Um, but before I ask another question, I want you to open up your book, any quotes or sections there you want to read, so our viewer or listener can just hear your words,
Okay.
because the goal here obviously is to provoke people to get this book. And so
Sure.
it can be on any topic, but wherever you open up, just read a portion of your work for the audience.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I've jotted a few down in preparation here, just in case
Mhm.
we could do this. And I'm going to go back to uh, the the uh, the profile question because that really had a marked influence on me and made a terrific difference. And for those folks who may think, oh, that's all in the past, this particular individual, some of the people that I interviewed initially, I knew were friends, acquaintances, business associates. I'm going to read about a young man named Dow Jock, and Dow now resides in West Des Moines, Iowa. I came across his name reading an article in the Des Moines Register. And I called him out of the blue. He didn't he didn't know me, I didn't know him, and I said, "Hey, I would like to interview you about racism in America." And he was so gracious. He said, "Sure." And we had 3 or 4 hour and a half conversations about a number of things. And but here's what I want to share about Dow. Dow was born in Khartoum, Sudan. His father, a general in the People's Liberation Army, was killed during the Second Sudanese Civil War when Dow was 6 years old. Along with his mother and younger brother, he fled Sudan and made his way to America when he was 12 years old. He spoke no English when he arrived. I don't want to repeat that. He
Mm.
spoke no English when he arrived. Incredibly, just 6 years later, he graduated from the prestigious Roosevelt High School in Des Moines and then went on to earn a degree in philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school, by the way. and a master's degree from the University of London. After completing his degrees, he enlisted in the United States Army. He was on active duty for a year in Iraq. Upon returning, he became the company commander of his Army Reserve Unit in Des Moines. He recently completed his doctorate in education from Drake University. So that's a little bit about this really fantastic individual. So I asked him the question, Dow, have you ever been racially profiled? And here's what he told me. Right after returning from deployment in Iraq, I was walking down the street near my home in West Des Moines. A gentleman who was approaching me left the sidewalk and went across the street, then recrossed the street and returned to the sidewalk after I had passed. I thought, I may have given my life for you during my service to the country, and you treat me like that. It was a very low point for me. That has happened numerous times during the last couple of years. And so there's a lot packed into that. Um, this is not the Deep South. This is in the middle of the state of Iowa. This isn't, shortly after the Civil War. Um, this is in the present time. And so I think, his words to me are quite powerful and a reminder of the work that we all have to do to provide not only this extraordinary individual, Dow Jock, a fair opportunity, but for all folks in our country to have a fair shot without having to look over their shoulder.
Certainly. And you said this isn't just after the Civil War. This is in the current day. What role do you believe education should play in dismantling systemic racism? And if you could redesign a school curriculum today, what would you add or change?
Oh, there's a lot that comes to mind, Karl. One of the worst things that's happening across the nation, and it's you know worse in some parts of the country than others, but book banning is just a sin as far as I'm concerned. Those matters should be determined by local folks. I'm living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa right now. The teachers, the parents, the school board in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, should have a big say in what materials and what books are available to the children. And why is that important? Well, one is a sense of history, and the expression that we'll repeat history. If we don't know history, we will repeat it,
Absolutely.
including all of the errors of the past, or at least there's a likelihood of that. But there's another deeper reason to include a variety of books in our schools. If you talk to any teacher of reading, they will tell you of primary importance for young readers is relevance.
Mhm.
We like to read about things we have some idea about or can identify with the characters.
Yep.
So if we're going to remove from the curriculum, which is the case in many places, references to the past, in particular the history of our African American children and their ancestors, that takes out a huge opportunity, a huge chunk of relevance for those kids. So they're always reading about someone else. And so, it's the right thing to do because we need to know our history. It's the right thing to do to include discussions about all of us. And not only so the Black children have relevance in their reading, but also white children, so my grandchildren, can learn about people who are different from them.
Mhm.
And, if you're going to put together a team of any kind, you don't want everybody with the same skills.
Right.
You want a diversity of viewpoints and a diversity of uh, experiences. And as we limit what's available for our kids to study in schools, we limit the possibilities of what could develop. And
Right.
I think that's a big challenge for us. And so I know there's a question in here, and we'll get in it more deeply, but one of the things people can do is become active in their communities
Mm.
with their boards of education, uh, with their legislators. I learned a long time ago, silence is consent.
Yes, it
So if
is.
someone says something outlandish in your presence
Mm.
and you remain silent, that person could think, well, there's agreement here. And so we have to, that's one of the things we have to do is become more vocal about the things that we truly believe. And I think there are more people that would agree with what I just said than disagree.
Yeah, certainly. Looking back at your journey, um, oh, not just while you were writing this book, but let's just say your life, what do you wish you would have maybe understood earlier about race and privilege?
Well, I'm not sure if I can even answer that, Carl, because it was the onion, peeling the onion. I mean, I had from my parents, I had a general sense of decency for
Mhm.
all people. But what I didn't do, and a key here, when I watch, a lot of my formative years were right in the heart of the civil rights movement in the 60s. We had the old black and white TV, and everybody watched one thing, and I saw, those things that took place. I saw the black and white images in Selma and Birmingham and Milwaukee and other places. And it was kind of, yeah, but that's there,
Right.
you know, that's somewhere else. That's those people. And
Mhm.
there was a turning point in my writing, and it came when I visited uh, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which chronicles the over 4,000 uh, lynchings that we know about in this country
Right.
between the 50s and and about 50 years later, 4,000 of those.
Mhm.
And on my journey, meeting people, including you and others, Karl, now it wasn't those people. You are
Mhm.
one of my people.
Mhm.
And that if you can think that way, it had tremendous influence on me. Gave me the fuel to keep going.
Mhm.
This was not an easy write.
I bet.
There's a lot of referencing and all that kind of stuff. And there were sometimes I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this. And I thought, wow, think of what the people you're writing about have been through.
Mhm.
John Lewis, man, beaten 22 times, uh, jailed over 44 times or something like 44 times. And then I thought, I guess I can keep, typing on my keyboard and learning more and sharing what I've learned. Um, so that just as I reflect, that's what comes to me that if you can get to the point where you can truly say we are in
Mhm.
this, it has made a big difference for me.
That is, I think what you just said at the end there is perfect timing because you brought up being coming of age during the civil rights movement and seeing these things happen in different parts of the country. And it's like that's over there. That's there. It didn't really touch you where you were, but now you look at your journey, your life, your interactions, and yeah, you can see that they are we are them. Um, and that's important because I still think, as sad as a commentary as it is, as closely connected as we all are via the internet and our mass communications, people still don't in real time see us as connected. So these events that are happening all around us, people still feel really disconnected um, from those things that should, if for nothing else, cause us pause and say, why are we allowing this to happen to any person, but more importantly, to any group? I mean, what are your thoughts? What could we do to get people to really understand what we allow to happen to the least of us will eventually happen to the rest of us.
Yeah, yeah. When you say that, it reminds me of a quote. John Dewey was uh, actually a philosopher, University of Chicago, 100 years ago, said, "What you wish for your own children, you should wish for all children." And so when we look at these uh, continuous scenes, and now with people actually being plucked off the streets,
Hmm.
and being sent to places of imprisonment, what it just put anyone
Hmm.
in that position,
Hmm.
that somebody who was, peacefully walking along the street, and because of the way they appear, their appearance, their skin color, frankly, are then put upon and taken somewhere. Sometimes we don't know where, those kinds of things. If you can internalize that, you'll feel the pain and you'll feel the injustice.
At least you should.
Yeah, well, I think so. I guess I speak for myself.
Yeah, it's us who have a conscience and a heart. Yeah, but
Yeah,
some don't. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
And no, really, and it sounds so simple, but if, it just starts with a few, and we have to continue to share. Certainly, things will be decided in a voting booth at some time. That's a that's a long way off. There's a
Yeah.
lot of things that are happening, will happen between then and now. And I truly believe in the power of local, if you want to call it politics, local interaction.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I live in Cedar Rapids. We have to have conversations with the people here about what we're gonna think is fair and just, and what goes on here. And I believe, because the communication across the country, there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of information out there. I think we have a chance, and I see more of it every day, that there is an awakening awareness of justice. And this is not, some people say, "Oh, don't get political." This is humanism. This is
It's
not
humanism.
politics.
Yeah, this is
This
human.
is, you know, a person believing that another person has worth, that
Mhm.
every other person has worth. And so those conversations, banding together at times when we need to, those kinds of things are the hope that we have. And as you know, Karl, the longest chapter in the book is the chapter on hope.
Yep.
And even in trying times, you can say, "Well, Dave, how could that be?" I look at the people who have, borne the weight of injustice and kept on and on. The John Lewises and the Medgar Evers, and those who um, are amazing individuals.
Mhm.
And we should reflect that, and we should embrace and honor that, and in their honor, do the things that we know are just and right.
Before we get to these last two questions, if you would, um, and I don't know if you have something highlighted in the chapter um, that discusses the names of different places, memorials set up to these
Mhm.
gentlemen or towns named. If you would just read a portion of that chapter, um, something that's you want the listener to hear, because I think we often you brought up the Pettus Bridge, named after uh, a Ku Klux Klan member, someone who was staunchly for segregation, and you know um, these names matter. And I know we're going through, even in real time, where our Defense Department is wanting to change the names from Confederate generals, or put Confederate generals' names on ships and back in prominent places. As asinine as that sounds, the Confederacy are similar to the January 6th folks who literally uh, uh, formed an insurrection against their country. but we're celebrating these individuals as heroes, or some of us anyway.
Mhm.
Um, so either read something from that chapter or just talk about the significance of that chapter and those names and what message it sends to people who know the pain of some of those individuals that they've caused.
I have two examples. I'm not going to read the pages, but I'll relate the stories that I think
Please.
um, speak. And both of them, by the way, are in Dubuque, Iowa. So, I've talked a little bit about the Dubuque history. I went to Marshall Elementary School in Dubuque, and I get north end of town, got a great education. Um, we had you went home for lunch, so I went back and forth to school, a couple times each day. So I haven't added it up, but thousands of times I walked by that big entrance with the name Marshall,
Mhm.
and I had no idea for whom that building was named. Well, when I was working on the chapter, being pretty tough on the folks in the South, having high schools named after Robert E. Lee and others, I thought, I better take a closer look at home. So I looked up Marshall School and learned that it was named for John C. Marshall, who was the longest serving Supreme Court Chief Justice in the history of the United States. And I thought, wow, I went to school named for that guy. Well, then I read a little bit further, and they're changing the name of a law school in Chicago, named after him, because they learned that during his lifetime he owned around 300 slaves. And he wrote opinions that were pro-slavery and prolonged slavery. Now, I haven't gone to the Dubuque School Board and said, you got to take the name off that building. But I do believe that the children who go to school there and the teachers who teach there and the people in the neighborhood and the folks in Dubuque should at least know for whom that building is named and to make, a decision. That's one example. There's a young man, and I talked about him. Well, he's passed now, but at one time he was a young man. He was 1 year ahead of my mother at Dubuque Senior High School. So in 1937, 1938, he graduated from Dubuque Senior High. He went to Iowa State, was not allowed to, it was a black man, was not allowed to stay on the campus in Ames. So he found a room in town and got his degree in engineering, and a few years later became a decorated flyer with the Tuskegee Airmen. Amazing. I went to the high school where this man, attended and graduated. There was not one trace of this individual's presence in that high school. I have to go and see if there is now. I'm not sure, Karl. But the Dubuque Airport, the terminal is now the Robert L. Martin Terminal in Dubuque, Iowa, named for this outstanding man. So, when we put names on things, again, we should know why we're doing it and what it represents. And to me, those are two examples in my hometown that are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. That Robert L. Martin gives me hope.
Mhm.
I gave a book talk not long ago in Dubuque, and there was a school board member in the audience. So we'll see if anything happens there. But, those are things that, because we often don't know. We just walk into a building and see a name on it, and that's fine. So my hope would be that people take a closer look at these things and that we can proudly say, yes, that is a name that we want on the school, you know, uh, whatever it is, a banner,
Yeah.
uh, plaques, and so on.
Parks. Yeah, absolutely. What do you hope, um, or who do you hope reads this book, and what would you like them to take from it? And I know you've done book talks and had people read it, but let's say for anyone new who comes across this podcast and decides to pick up the book, and if you would hold it up just so people could see the cover if you have it there?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
What do you hope they take from it?
Yeah, I hope they recognize their own journey.
Mhm.
You can only start where you are. I would hope they would read with an open mind. As you know, Karl, periodically in the book, I challenge people to challenge me. I've said some things. I believe they're well researched. The things about my life personally, I relate and ask people to ask themselves those same questions. I have invited people to let me know if they find inaccuracies in there. But my hope is that they maybe could adopt that loosely as a way to go about learning more about things whatever it may be, certainly racism in this case, and keep that open mind and continually answer, how do I feel about this? How does this strike me? It seems to me in conversations often today that people come unprepared, but with preconceived notions
Naturally.
and strong feelings. And when you scratch that away and kind of pick at it a little bit, you'll see that it's not founded on much, perhaps other than hearsay or what's been around their neighborhood forever, which may or may not be helpful. So, an open mind, uh, being willing to look inward first. Another thing that I see out there when something goes wrong, instead of looking internally and saying, how could I help this, or what did I do to bring this situation about? If look internally, how have I contributed to make it worse, perhaps? And what can I do to help get us to a better place? So that I would hope they would read the book with that spirit in mind and open-mindedness and questioning. And if you find something you don't agree with, I'm open to receiving those, and that could perhaps put me in a better place as well.
Have, considering you've had some public venues where you were able to talk about your book, and I'm assuming over time people have come back to you, maybe share a story or two about how your book has impacted them and the reactions, you know, um, moved you in any unexpected way. What has been the feedback and how have you responded to some of that feedback? Good,
I've,
bad, or
I, yeah, I've received almost zero negative feedback, which surprises me. I mean, in this day and age, you could say anything and expect some criticism. Um, it may be the way I approached it with an open mind, sharing my own, inadequacies and shortcomings and misunderstandings, those kinds of things. But I think in sharing the stories of others and about others, it's hard for people to say, well, that didn't happen. I mean, these are real people living among us
Yep.
who encounter these things day in and day out and persevere. And so I've in some cases, this wouldn't surprise you, but have been preaching to the choir, as they say. Some people have said, that I help just open that up a little bit more for them and give them pathways to continue on their journey. In my opinion, journeys toward fairness and equality. And occasionally, there will be someone who said, I came in here ready to go after you. And I read it or listened to you, and now I'm in a different place. Maybe not totally. They may say, Dave, I don't totally agree with you, but we're moving the needle, and it's a journey about honoring human dignity, and that I think that's a hard thing to argue about, trying to get all of us in a better place.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't, the people that I write about mostly in the book have done heroic things, and those are the people that I think have a lasting impact. The people that rip others off financially or otherwise, we don't hold them up, or we shouldn't, as heroes. So, I've held up models that I think we should all aspire to, and certainly give me when I'm, feeling that I'm having a bad day, I say, but you're not facing some of the things that these folks have and continue to do. So, overall, Karl, the messages have been good. I've had probably, I don't know, 65 book events or something like that.
So
And
awesome.
and the feedback in person has been good, and then the quiet emails or texts and those kinds of things. So, keep you hope you do something worthwhile,
Mhm.
and it's looking like I maybe have.
Oh, I know you have
And
personally.
I'm
I vouch for you.
and I'm continuing on, as there's more in the files that didn't get in the book, and
Certainly.
things continue to happen
Mhm.
that cry out for us to make our voices heard.
Mhm.
Um, but there are things that have already happened of which I continue to learn as well, and sharing those has I think is making a positive difference.
Absolutely. One final question. And in your last answer, you kind of talked about the message, but if you had one message, um, or multiple messages for listeners, just starting their own journey of understanding racism, what would that be? And what practical step, could they take today after listening to this podcast?
Uh, you know, Figure out where you are in your own journey. And do you like where you are? Do you like the feelings you have when we talk about race, or you see things that we all see? Uh, are you willing to do a little work? If you're not satisfied with where you are, that suggests you've got to do something differently. Be that read a book. I think there's a good one they could read that we've been talking about here, Karl.
I could
You
say it's a
know,
very good book. They should all
yeah.
read it.
And there's lots of them out there. I mean, I used over 500 references, and there's 700 citations in the book. So my writing is on the shoulders of a lot of people, and a lot of their work will get into what I'm going to do in the future as well. But, you know, find out where you are, be willing to do the work, read, have a conversation. The Kareem Abdul-Jabbar quote that comes near the end of the book. And I'm paraphrasing, find someone who doesn't look like you, go out and have a conversation with them. It may change your world. And when I give book talks, I end with that quote, and then I add my own words. It has changed mine, and I would say in an undeniably positive way.
What an important and challenging conversation, from Dr. Mark with Dr. Markward. His book, From Dubuque to Selma and Beyond, isn't just a memoir. It's an invitation to each of us to reflect on our own stories and the role we play in dismantling racism. If you'd like to dig deeper, you can find the book wherever it's sold. Dr. Markward, if you want to mention where people can pick up your book.
Yeah, it is all the major online booksellers. I don't commercialize them, but you can maybe with a little imagination figure out who
Certainly.
they are. Um, if It's available in public libraries, and so the podcast is originating with Karl out east. And if you go to the library and ask, it's been my experience, people telling me they will order the book and put it in their stock. That's another way.
That's a
If you'd
great.
like a signed copy, you could drop me an email message at davemarkward@gmail.com. I'd be happy. We can work out the arrangements and get you a signed copy. But it's my honor and privilege, and all of the proceeds from any of the sales go to school districts where I give book talks, or some, for instance, the African American Museum of Iowa invited me to speak, and the proceeds went there. So I hope we sell millions and make a lot of money so I can give it to those folks doing good work.
Thank you. So here at Perhaps Today, we believe every conversation is a step toward understanding, healing, and purposeful leadership. If today's episode encouraged you, please share it with a friend. Leave us a review and join the ongoing dialogue by connecting with us at perhapstodayinc.com or on our YouTube channel, Perhaps Today TV 4009. Like, subscribe, share this podcast. But until next time, remember, change begins with listening and purpose begins with action. Perhaps today is the day we each take one more step towards justice and truth. Thank you, Dr. Markward, for your time and, more importantly, for the book that you wrote for us to read.
Thank you, Karl.